Hi, everyone. This is an episode that I've been really itching to do for quite a while because I think it's really interesting, really entertaining. And it fits in nicely with this kind of trajectory I've been on lately of looking at how objectivist concerns can contribute to typing. And again, let me say, I should reiterate some things. It's been a while since I did a disclaimer. I am just some regular lady who has been really intensely interested in the MBTI for, 20 years now, and who has done a lot of reading about it over all those years and a lot of hundreds of hours of discussion with friends about it and bothering all of them about it, as well as informal typing of I don't even know. I don't know. I couldn't count how many over all those years, but let's say of my 30 of my friends, at least another 20 of friends who, have been involved in a group discussion at some point with me. And anyway, just tens and tens and tens of people. And my feedback from that has been really, really good in terms of how accurate I am with that usually. Not always, but often. And part of the reason I started making these episodes to put online is because I ran out of I guess I recognized that I don't know, I was enjoying other people's videos, and I thought I have something to contribute to all this, and also because I'd run out of people I wanted to talk. My desire to talk about it had exceeded the number of people who were available who wanted to listen to that much of it. So I thought, all right, I'll just go out there and get in touch with people who are as obsessed with it as I am. Anyway, and I, as I've said in other videos, a couple of other videos, I feel like as an ENFP with the dominant, who's all of the foregoing, who also hits the dominant function of extroverted intuition at the helm a lot of the time, for better and worse, with its focus on the external environment, and then with my auxiliary function being introverted feeling, making me naturally very, very interested in people and psychology and sociology and human behavior and so on, interpersonal and intrapersonal dynamics. I do think that my focus over all these years, informal though it may be, I'm just a layperson, just a hobbyist, but I do think I've seen some things, and I'm always open to discussion too for people who disagree or have something to add or change or whatever. I'm always happy to hear from. I'm just happy to get comments, period. So yeah, please give me your feedback if ever you have some. And so, as I said, I've been sort of on a trajectory of exploring how objectivist observation can be of use in typing. And I'll reiterate this as well, because I think it bears repeating, that I do agree that all typing, be it self-typing or if it's at the invitation, if you're invited to type somebody else, that it's a really good idea to always start from a knowledge of the cognitive functions from Carl Jung's work in typology. And it's also always a really good idea to return to them in the evaluation process and check in with them very carefully, and to not be misled, to really be on guard against being misled by stereotypes and on relying on sort of behavioralisms or external cues too heavily. And certainly it's a bad idea to rely on them exclusively. It's a terrible idea, and that is bound to really lead you astray in many cases. However, I also believe that objectivist sort of considerations can be very useful and worthwhile, because I think where I part ways with purists who would say don't ever look at anything but the cognitive functions and how they're working in your own mind. I feel that that's a really tall order, and I don't see how it's reasonable to expect that just focusing on that is going to necessarily be more fruitful for everybody than just focusing on objectivist concerns and external cues. This because, in favor of letting external cues play a part, patterned cognition, which is what the cognitive functions essentially translates into behavior. Not all of it translates into behavior, of course, but a lot of it does. And it can be seen, it can be looked at. And I think of as my inspiration a little bit here, Dr. John Gottman, who's a really preeminent couples therapist, and he was made probably most famous in the mainstream by the chapter devoted to his work in Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink. He is I expect he's an INTP. I haven't looked into it very closely, but I'm guessing based on all the interviews I've read of his and what I've heard of him. My father is a clinical psychologist who specializes in couples therapy, and he's Gottman certified, so he's spent time with Gottman and Gottman's wife Julie, who's also a couples therapist, and they lead workshops together and also do things in tandem with emotionally focused therapist and maverick forerunner Sue Johnson. Anyway, I digress, but Gottman got his start. His first job was actually as a mathematician, and what he was noticing is that he had this really ridiculously high accuracy rate in terms of predicting outcomes with couples that he had spent only the most glancing amount of time with or listening to. So I think his rationalist, he's certainly an NT of some kind. I don't know if he's an INTP, but he's definitely an NT. His curiosity was aroused, and being a mathematician, being someone who's interested in proving things that seem to be woo-woo, he likes to prove things or disprove them. So he set about trying to do that. You can read much more about it in Gladwell's book, or you can just look up John Gottman online. He's very interesting to read one way or another, and his work is extremely interesting. So he set about trying to quantify and see, like, just to explore empirically, what were things that were, if he were to record and then code data very, very carefully and very minutely about couples' interactions, would there be patterns that would emerge from that? And if so, what would the patterns tend to indicate? So now he's had over 35 years of love lab experience, and blah, 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 blah. So I'm thinking of him. There is a great deal that the point being here, that there is a great deal that can be known via objectivist consideration. It's not the be all and end all, that's for sure. But it is, again, I'm a proponent of both abstract inquiry and interior inquiry and objectivist. I think that they both have their place and their value. And I think that a limit of being purism as concerns just looking at the cognitive functions, never ever looking at behavioralisms, never looking at objectivist stuff, is that, well, there are a few. One is that I would wager that a good number of the types are not well equipped at all cognitively to examine that. Now, of course, there'll be exceptions in any of the 16 types. Individuals have their different talents and so on, and there's a great deal of variation between people of the same MBTI type, or people who share the same cognitive functions and the same prominence. However, to ask people to examine with any kind of impartiality, without strangely misleading, terribly misleading bias, to examine and observe the workings of their own minds, that's a meta cognitive activity. And I highly doubt that members of all 16 types, that just everybody in the world would be able to do that very well, or would even know what the hell that is, in many cases. I think that's asking people to do that. I think that's very suited to introverted intuitives, potentially. And maybe it's no accident that that many of the people I've seen proposing that are, although not all, whatever. But to ask people to impartially observe the contents of observe their own thinking as it's happening, this metacognition, I think it's a bit like asking a fish, hey, is the water fine? Yeah, I don't think all people can do that at all. And I don't think all people can do it well. That's for damn sure. So for those who would find it helpful I think what can be useful as an adjunct, at least, is to perhaps look at transcripts, to look at what you write and what you say, if you're self-typing. Take a look at the content of what you're saying, and as well as how you're saying it. Because there will be many, many clues in there. Because, of course, whatever, again, not that all of our thinking gets translated into action, and it certainly doesn't always get doesn't always get translated into plain action that you can just take at face value and take for granted that you understand, where it came, what thinking was behind such and such a behavior. However, very often it is the case, though, it is always the case that whatever comes out was a result of cognition. Any sort of involuntary action at all involving the sympathetic nervous system had to do with cognition, patterned cognition. And in terms of interpreting it, I really don't see why we're so much more likely to go wrong with interpreting that as expressed in an objective way, versus watching the workings, the invisible workings of our own mind. I just don't see, it just doesn't make any sense to me that one is completely dangerous and misleading and you should never ever look at it. And the other one is the one true way of doing it. That doesn't make sense to me. So this is a little bit of a type tip too. I do suggest to people that if they're really stumped, that one more thing they might try that might help them is and this would be quite labor intensive, of course, but it might be very fruitful, is to record some spontaneous conversations you're having with people. Especially, it would be maybe especially useful if you know the types of the people you're talking with. And then to transcribe sections of it. And then again, turn the pattern cognition that has become an action, turn it into a document, turn it into an object, quite literally, and then parse it and really try and look at that as objectively as you can and see if there are any cues in there as to which cognitive functions you are relying more. You can look at sort of frequency of the patterns that come up if you're able to do that at all. You can look at what the patterns are, how often they come up, which ones seem to be very sophisticated and kind of persistent, which ones seem to be kind of glancing and here and there and occasional. I don't know if that's something you could put the effort, if you could stomach putting the effort into, that might be helpful for you. And once again, I also recommend that if there are people who are around you who are knowledgeable about the MBTI, and that's a big caveat, knowledgeable about the MBTI, quite knowledgeable, if lay people, invite, if you trust them and you feel comfortable doing it, I would really recommend having them in to take a look. Because again, people are, people I think very often overestimate their own abilities at self-assessment. Not everybody. Some people really, truly are good at it. But many people are truly terrible at it, and they think they're great. And they also think they're great at typing other people, and they're abysmal at doing so. So anyway, I just don't see what would hurt availing yourself of more modalities that could be helpful if you're stuck, and if just looking at the cognitive functions and examining it in this metacognitive way, if that hasn't gotten you anywhere yet that you want to go, why not look at some other things? So another video coming up shortly that's much more specific about such documents that I'm proposing. Thank you for watching once again.